Hello and welcome to the Car Care channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about AC compressors. What are the different types of Toyota and Lexus AC compressors? How do they work? What are their common problems? And most importantly to you, how do you make your compressor last longer? Let us get started. We'll talk about what a compressor does, the different types we use, and then we'll dive in each one in detail right after this. So to start with the basics, what is an AC compressor? As the name suggests, it's a compressor. All the AC compressor does, it takes the refrigerant, compresses it at higher pressure, and sends it off. And to understand why we need to do that, refrigerant has a specific property. The higher the temperature, the higher the pressure, or the higher the pressure, the higher the temperature. And that part is important. The lower the pressure, the lower the temperature. And that's how this works. The compressor will take that refrigerant that is just sitting in the lines, compresses it, and starts pushing it. It's going to go to a place where we're going to create a restriction. When you create a restriction, you're going to lower the pressure. And remember the property of refrigerant, when you lower the pressure, you just created a colder area or took away a lot of the heat from that refrigerant, and then the cycle continues. It's a lot more complicated than that, but that's the basic idea. Compressor, for lack of a better word, is a little engine. It has pistons that just go back and forth and they compress the refrigerant. That's how this works. But throughout the years, things have changed dramatically. And from that, you actually have technically two types of compressors that Toyota has used over the years. We are referring to R134 compressors. Although the 1234YF, this is a new refrigerant, they're a little bit similar, but we're going to focus on the 134A compressors. You're going to find them in majority of Toyotas up to the very newest ones. So the very first type of compressor, which are these two, these are clutch compressors. You have a magnetic clutch that you either engage the compressor or disengage it completely. You have very little control in some of the newest ones, but you can't really have that finite control where you can completely variably change how much we are letting refrigerant through. Hence why you have a clutch. It's either on or off. You can't have half on or 3/4 away. You can't do that. These are the old school stuff. You get into the new stuff where we get into the variable displacement compressors. These are compressors that do not have a clutch. The pulley is always spinning. But the way we control the flow here is we can kind of fine tune how much refrigerant is getting through and how much are we compressing it. So that way you can really throttle this compressor to get exactly what we needed to output for our cooling needs. Unlike these where they're on or off and we end up shutting them off when we get to a certain point and let the pressure equalize and then turn them on again and they keep cycling on off. These don't cycle. They're continuously running exactly at what we need them to run. Having said that, we're going to start with the very old school style. We're going to start how this works and what's going on with it. Let's start with the first type of compressors. This is a clutch compressor. And the way you know clutch compressors, this is where the drive belt is. When this turns, do you see how this part is not turning? Because that's actually what's connected to the compressor inside. This is just a pulley. So when you turn this is when the compressor is actually turning, not when this is just turning. This is a magnetic clutch. There's a magnet inside behind this pulley. When you energize it, and you energize it through this wire right here, you see how this one ends up right here? When you energize that magnet, it's going to pull on the outside part in, and it's going to fuse these together, and then they turn as a unit. That's how that works. Now, there is another, you see these wires. You see these wires. This is something that Toyota used for a long time. This is a lock sensor. All this does is it tells the computer, because this is where we started with computers, this is right around the 90s. It tells the computer that this compressor actually locked, that we don't have a malfunction with the clutch. And the way it does that is when it starts seeing the internals of this compressor turning, it sends a signal and the computer knows that the internals are actually turning, because it has no way of knowing if this clutch actually engaged or not. Speaking of the clutch, let's take it apart and see how that looks like. This is the first part of this clutch, and I want you to see both of them. This is the surface it's kind of like a friction. You actually have a little clutch material here. This is kind of like a pressure plate on a manual transmission. The magnet sits behind this. We're going to take it out and take a look at it. But basically, these two get pushed against each other, and they come in contact, and they fuse together, and that's how things start going. Let's take the clutch out, and these are shims. We're going to talk about these in a moment. Let's take the clutch out so you can see how that works on the inside. Snap ring usually holds these in place. Let's pull this. Take a look. So, let's see what we got here. This is the pulley that the drive belt rides on. See, it's just a bearing. That's all it is. There isn't anything else. But it has this contact surface where these two will fuse together. And what fuses them together is this, which is basically just a magnet. It has two wires. You can put ground to it and power. This magnetizes. And when that magnetizes, it's going to magnetize this part, which is going to pull this side together. So you'll hear the term magnetic clutch. And that's basically what it is. This is the magnet part. Let's remove this, and then we'll tear down the compressor and see how this works. And this is the magnet part. This is what actually magnetizes. Then if you see on the inside, this is the outside part. This is what actually splines into the compressor itself. So we're going to start by taking our lock sensor here, and then we'll tear this compressor down and we'll talk about it. So now let's remove our sensor. And that's all it is. It's just going to detect the engagement of the clutch. That's all it is. Very, very simple. Before we tear down this compressor, I'd like to tell you one thing. Compressors, not a DIY thing to tear them down. If you want to rebuild one, that's a very specialty job. And as far as compressors go for a repair world, we're going to change a clutch if need be, or change the entire compressor. That is one thing I want to tell you. Okay. I want you to observe the operation of this. I'm going to first turn it. Do you see how there's like a little plate that is moving up and down. I'm going to get it close so you can see it. Watch this plate, how it moves. You see how it's going up and down, up and down? It's actually pushing on pistons. They're not one piston, they're multiple. Let's take the other side. And here they are. Watch what happens when you turn your compressor. See these pistons moving up and down? That's what creates. This is what's compressing. You're assuming, if you watched engines, you know, the stroke is so long and the piston is going way up, way down. Folks, that's all we need. Because this is spinning the speed of the engine. And that's all it does. It's just going to keep doing that. This is the most basic, we're going to call it modern compressor, but this is the most basic modern compressor. It's a little manifold that directs the refrigerant where it needs to go, a few bearings. Think of this like an engine. These are the pistons. This is actually a cylinder head. Very cool. So, it has two one-way valves. One direction and one the other. These are actually valves. So when the compressor, when the piston is coming down, it's creating suction. This is going to get pulled up and refrigerant will go in this way. But when the piston starts going up or pushing on this, this will close, but there's another valve right here that opens, and you can see that valve right here, opening. Very cool, right? That this is technically a cylinder head, but this is not a variable compressor. This is all you can compress. So it's either compressing at full capacity or off, doing nothing. That's the limitation of this. That's why compressors with a clutch that are basic like this, they cycle on, off, because otherwise if you leave them on all the time, you're just gonna freeze everything. That's the problem. That's the limitation of these. That's why they cycle on, off. But otherwise, they're super basic. There isn't much to them. Having said that, let's move on to the next compressor, which is also a clutch compressor, but a little bit more high-tech. And this is the second type of AC compressors. This is a pretty high-tech compressor, and this is the last compressor with a clutch that is variable. See, here's the problem. Why are they reinventing the wheel with compressors? Why can't we just keep the old school compressors? Emissions, folks. You put a compressor that comes on at full capacity and then shuts off, it's a lot of load on the engine when we don't really need it at full capacity. You notice old cars, compressors will always come on, off continuously, because you're watching your pressures. When your pressure low side gets so low, it's going to disengage, let it rise up again, and then engage again. And that is not good for emissions. Then come this one. This one is actually an early variable compressor. This compressor, this particular compressor, is out of a 2009 Toyota Sienna. This compressor has the ability not only to lock, but it has the ability of moving how much the pistons are traveling. We're going to take it apart and see how that works. Let's talk about the basics first. You notice this one has a lot more stuff to it, but if you really scan closely, it has a clutch. You see the pulley turns independently, so you have the clutch. You have a lock sensor right here, same thing. But then we have a little solenoid here. This is what changes what is the capacity or the displacement of this compressor. This was the early type because you still have a clutch, but it'll engage and disengage a lot less frequently. You're not constantly on, off, on, off. No, it's going to engage. It's only going to disengage when things get too much. Let's put it this way. Let's get this clutch out, and then we'll talk about how this works. So this clutch is exactly the same way. You have this plate that against this, and you do have the magnetic underneath them. One thing we didn't mention on the previous compressor. Let's see if we can get them. They are stuck, or this one doesn't have them. So there's something called an air gap. There has to be a specific gap between these two when this is sitting like this, because if you have it too close, it's going to start dragging and these will overheat and they'll burn up. You'll burn up this clutch part. If the gap is too large, when this engages and the magnet pulls it, it's going to start slipping and also going to create heat and damage this. There has to be a specific gap between these two, and you adjust that gap by putting shims here to raise and lower this. That's how this works. Let's take this out and we'll dive into this compressor. I will say this one more time. Compressors, not exactly a DIY job to take them apart. This compressor also has a lock sensor, just like the other one. Just lets the computer know that the operation of the clutch actually happened. This one is a more sophisticated one. This one actually looks at the compressor to see. The old one, it was just a vibration sensor. It catches when that click happens. It's like a little microphone. So this is a lot more accurate than the previous one. See how things are improving with time. Now you notice this compressor has this little plug here. This is a solenoid. Let's take it apart and we'll talk about it. See, here goes the shims. They finally came out when we're talking about the clutch. You notice initially, let me take this bearing out. Initially, like, This looks very similar to the previous one. This turns and the pistons come up and down, right? Looks very, very similar. However, this is where things are significantly different. This valve actually can direct flow on the backside. Let's get our cylinder head out. So get the inner piece of it. Unfortunately, came apart. This is a swash plate, and I can never get it to activate because it is spring loaded. The basic idea is when this solenoid closes, it's going to redirect pressure to this middle part, push on this, which will now significantly increase the travel of these pistons. You see how they're barely moving right now? When you push on this, I can't push it because I'm against this strong spring, but let's simulate it a little bit. Do you see how their travel completely increased? This is a variable part. If you have this compressor all the way up, see how little they move? They create very, like a low duty cycle on this compressor. When this goes down, now you're moving them a lot. The same principle of an engine. You're basically effectively changing the displacement of this compressor. You notice on the old compressor, we had nothing here. It's just wide open. Nothing happening here. But on this one, we have this, which effectively changes the displacement of that compressor. And you may be asking why, because everything else is exactly the same. I mean, it came apart unfortunately, but it's basically the same thing. You got the valves and everything else exactly the same. Here's the other side of the valve. You can see it better. So there's a valve that goes one way, and then there's the other valve that goes the other way. So why do we do all this mess? Well, emissions, folks. Talked about it. Now this compressor, the clutch, when it locks, you don't have to keep lock, unlock, and this thing every time it locks and engages, it's drawing so much on the engine. No, you can have this run barely doing much, and you can keep the compressor engaged. And when you need it, you can increase, and then you have a much higher displacement through this compressor. Fortunately, because of the way the spring works, and this swash plate is really difficult to turn because it's spring loaded, I can't show you exactly how this works so you can see it, like how much it changes. But this is the early version of a variable compressor. Let's talk about some additional things. This valve can fail. That's the problem. And let's try to remove this valve so you can actually see it, because it's nothing fancy. And here is this valve. All it does is direct the flow of refrigerant to a different place. That's all it does. These valves with contamination, and you're noticing this compressor is relatively clean. We're going to take one that has a little bit more contaminants. They have little tiny passages. You clog these, we're going to have problems. This compressor is not going to run right. It could be stuck in its lowest state, where now it barely does anything. When you need it at a high capacity, it's not going to do it. Or it'll be stuck at a high capacity where now it's like way overdoing things, and the pressure are way too low and it doesn't cool anymore. These are some of the potential problems with these. However, this is kind of an antiquated design, because they come to a point, this is how engineers kind of function. Well, how can we do this better? Because we're on to something here. This variable stuff is really cool. But then they realize, wait a second. Why do we need a clutch if we can control this compressor and almost shut it off where it does absolutely nothing? Why do we need a clutch? Let's go to the next type and show you how they actually resolve that. Then we have the mighty one, the clutchless compressor. Although this is not the latest iteration, we're going to get into that, but this is a pretty high-tech compressor, even by today's standards, folks. This came out in the mid-2010s, and this is pretty much the golden standard today. You notice something about this compressor, it looks very similar to the previous one, except we don't have a clutch. This is a clutchless compressor, or a variable displacement compressor. They discovered, like, wait a second, we can vary how much this compressor runs. We can even shut it off internally, where the pistons are not even barely moving or doing anything. So why do we even need a clutch? That's what they discovered. So you notice we still have that solenoid that varies that wash plate and changes the travel of the piston. But when we have this, possibly the worst idea in the planet, this guy, this is a mass airflow or flow sensor. Talk about that when we take it apart. Speaking of, this one has only one thing here. Let's take it. Let's move the compressor out of the way and talk about this. Something about this. Do you see these? This is actually meant to break away in case the compressor locks up. When it breaks away, now this is just a pulley that turns. Pretty cool, right? Now, let's take this compressor apart. Initially, looks very similar, and this compressor has a lot of debris in it. We'll talk about this a little bit later on. So, initially, it looks very, very similar to the other one. Do you notice something about this compressor? Look at the oil color, how dirty it is. Look at this. Extremely dirty. Now I want you guys to keep note of that, because we're going to talk about this in a moment here. Just for comparison, this is how the other one is. See how dirty this one is? How clean this one is? I'm going to talk about that. I want you to keep a mental note of that. Let's pull this part out. This part is very similar. You have the two valves, the one-way valves, exactly the same. And look what we got here. It's basically exactly the same as the clutch one. They just removed the clutch. Same thing. Here's that swash plate in the back. This one, do you see that there's that plate that can change the angle, and then you have a much larger displacement. Again, note how dirty this one is. There's something else in this compressor. This guy. This is called a flow sensor. Let's pull it out and we'll talk about it. This is a flow sensor. Basically a mass airflow sensor. Let's see if I can. I've actually never taken one out, so let's see if we actually can do that to this one. Not exactly sure how this comes out. We're just gonna break it probably in the process, but let's see. So we can talk about it. Should technically come right out. I don't think this sensor's coming out. That's the problem with these. They usually never want to come out. Let's talk about it. So, someone decided we need to know exactly how much refrigerant flow we have so we can determine how to operate this valve. If you own a Toyota with either both styles that has a flow sensor, you already know what we're on about. This is a terrible idea because these love to stick or fail. And the best part is, as you can see, I'm trying to remove it, it's literally just breaking. Well, might as well break it. See, yeah, you can't even do anything with it. Maybe. No, that's completely broke. Yeah, it's completely broke. Fortunately, basically, this measures the amount of refrigerant that is flowing, and yeah, terrible idea. That's all I'll tell you, because these love to fail, and then we have a world of problems. That's what this is. This is a #1 failure in this type of compressor. Then we have the last type of compressor. This one we're not going to take apart because it's basically exactly the same as the one we just saw. Doesn't have a clutch. Does have that breakaway damper here. Has a solenoid to control the flow, but it doesn't have a flow sensor because they've just figured, wait a second, we can monitor the pressure elsewhere. We don't need it on the compressor, which is a great move. Folks, I want to switch directions and let's talk about why do compressors fail. This is the most important thing. Compressors fail for a variety of reasons. For example, this particular compressor is a perfectly healthy compressor, except the solenoid failed. This was actually a known issue with these. This is from a 14 Corolla. They just had a problem manufacturing, these fail. Otherwise, compressor is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. This solenoid can't get it separate. And this solenoid looks like this. If we can just get this part separate, we can save this compressor. Just pull it out, install a new one, we're done. But they don't. And I understand why they don't. Because when you allow folks to fix AC systems that are not supposed to, this is what happens. This is what happens. See this? Heavy debris. It's like sandy. See how dark this compressor is? No, this didn't fry. Look at this. Just covered in grime and all kinds of debris. Look at the inside of this. It's like all dark, full of debris. Folks, the car that this compressor came out of, this disgusting one, is a repeat offender. This car is 2017 Toyota Camry, belongs to a real dear customer of ours. The flow sensor failed. Very common. Told him you need a compressor. We put the compressor on. Then, like a month later, car got in an accident. Body shop repaired the car. Then they came to us maybe a week after that. Hey, my AC stopped working. Check the car, has no refrigerant. An AC line got cut because they didn't route it right and it got rubbed on a piece of metal and broke. Okay, well, let's replace the AC line. Put the car back together. We're good. Exactly a month later, the compressor we replaced failed. Flow sensor. Okay, great. Maybe we had a bad unit, right? I mean, we got to take care of our customer. That's why we got warranty. We warranted the compressor. Now, this is compressor #2, which is actually this one. At that point, we were nearing the end of the season. Fast forward through the winter. First time they used the AC, it worked for a week, then it stopped. This time, solenoid is doing nothing. Absolutely nothing. Then I just, something was not adding up to me. Why are we having repeated compressor problems since the accident? I took the AC lines. I believe it was this one, or trying to see which one. I believe it was this one. This is what I saw inside. It's just black debris, like sand. What do you think happened to this compressor? I'll tell you what happened. The body shop decided to leave the AC lines open. When they did this, apparently they needed to move some AC lines out of the way. This was wide open. They filled it up with dust. And then when they closed it up, recharged AC, this whole dust that was now sitting in a few lines circulated through the entire system. We tried to flush it. Nothing. You're not gonna get the dirt and debris, and this is literally like sand that is sitting in the bottom of the condenser and the evaporator. You will never be able to get it out. There's just simply no way other than cutting it open. And this is why we had to replace the entire HVAC system on this car at a monumental cost. Folks, the number one reason AC compressors fail is contamination. And the second one is service. Otherwise, unless they are problematic design to begin with and poorly made, the compressors could last the life of the car. Here's how contamination happens. Obviously, this car had an abnormal event, and body shops should be very careful when they leave AC lines open. But the other source of contamination is bad service. Hey, automotive shop, when was the last time you serviced your machine? Or is this the same machine from 1955 that you've been using? When was the last time you replaced the filters on this thing? When was the last time you flushed the hoses and cleaned the machine on the inside or had it serviced of any kind? That's the problem. See, I see folks, their AC works perfect. Ice cold, no problems whatsoever. They'll go to a shop, hey, I need to change my refrigerant. Well, I need to recharge my AC. I need to service it. And you know what? Good shops will take one good look at you and ask you, do you have a problem? No? Okay. The most we're going to go is we're going to check pressures. If the pressures are within spec and the AC is working properly, we're not recharging it because this is not a coolant you replace. Refrigerant is contained in a sealed system. If we don't have a leak, the same refrigerant from the day they charged it at the factory will be there for the life of the car. If it leaks, we got to fix the leak, not just recharge it and keep going. That's the whole point. How could you get this level of contaminants when it's a sealed system? That's what I'd like you to ask yourself. But when we go and we're just trying to make a buck and the customer asks, hey, do we have to do anything with the AC? Oh yeah, let's recharge it. And you hooked up your machine that's been contaminated by 10 cars. This happens. That is the most common reason why compressors fail. The other reason, you go to replace a compressor for one reason or another. For example, the solenoid failed. The oil. You overfill it with oil or you underfill it with oil, we have a problem. These compressors, when they come new, they come filled to the factory amount. But some of that oil may be the condenser, maybe in the evaporator, or folks will be uncareful, and this is the common thing. They'll tip the compressor, it'll leak all its oil, and they'll just install it. Well, now you have the compressor with no oil, because that's how this works. Folks, you can't contaminate the AC system. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Heavily applies here. And this is an extreme case, but this is the result. This is what you're going to end up getting from bad service. So the $1 million question is, how do you keep your car from having compressor problems or AC problems in general? The simple answer to that is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And if it's broke, fix it right, move on with life. That's the bottom line. Compressors fail most of the time. They either have a problem with their design, that is a bad design flat out, or contamination. That's really, or bad install, or something to do with service. Here's the bottom line, folks, and I see this mistake all the time. Folks ask me this all the time in the shop. I need to recharge my AC. Well, why do you need to recharge your AC? Well, just to make sure it keeps running. Is it running? Yes. Let's hook up some gauges, make sure we have good pressures. If everything is good, we're done. Don't do anything. It's a sealed system. That's number one. Number two thing that I get, well, I keep charging it every year and it keeps losing refrigerant. So I just charge it every year. Folks, that is actually an EPA violation because the refrigerant is harmful for the environment, number one. Number two, fix the leak. Today we had a Land Cruiser that has rear AC. Rear AC has been bypassed. Folks, if we're gonna cut corners with AC systems, that's when the problems start. Because when you bypass the rear of the Land Cruiser, for example, how do you know how much refrigerant to put in the system? We're gonna keep experimenting until we're good. That's the problem. Don't experiment with AC systems. You have a leak, fix it. Compressor goes out, try to find out, is it just a compressor that failed, or is it a problem that we have? Are we low on oil? Do we have contamination? If everything checks out, it's just a failed compressor, okay. Don't go buy a cheapo compressor, especially with Toyota and Lexus. Always stick with Denso or the original one. When you have a clutch compressor, always replace the clutch. This is a mistake I see all the time. Folks will just get the compressor. Sometimes Toyota will tell you just the compressor. Oh, the clutch is fine, we'll just swap it. Don't do that, because you may have to end up doing this job all over again if the clutch fails. And usually, if the compressor fails, clutch is not far behind. Always get them as an assembly if possible. Sometimes not possible, and if it is not possible, make sure the person that installed that clutch knows how to set air gaps, because this is not a bolt-on part and let's go. You could make that clutch fail within a week. It's very important that you pay attention to these things. And variable compressors, as much as folks dislike them, they're actually very efficient. They're usually trouble-free, except when we have contamination. That's their number one thing. They'll immediately fail because this little solenoid will get stuck, and that's it. There's nothing to do. You can't get these solenoids. And some folks will go at manufacturers, well, why can't we get this solenoid? And I agree with them, because we could just replace the solenoid. But the better question is, if this solenoid, like in the case of this particular compressor, they have a known problem. The solenoid electronically failed. But if that's not the case, the solenoid is getting stuck, wouldn't we want to ask ourselves, why is it getting stuck to begin with? Because, again, the AC system is a sealed system. How would you get contaminants in other than a compressor that sent debris everywhere in the system? But then the better question is, why did it do that? That's the number one problem in the automotive industry. Nobody asks why. They just want to know what to do so we can fix it and be done. No, why it happened? Because the why will determine, is this going to happen a month from now again? That's the biggest thing. Folks, if it ain't broke, don't fix it with AC systems with Toyota and Lexus. That's where I see all the problems, is when we service the system just because, and then introduce contaminants, introduce all the wrong charge, the wrong amount of oil. We recover and don't add oil. All kinds of problems. And all started because we couldn't leave it alone. That's something I will ask you. If your AC is working fine, let it be. Just enjoy it. If it leaks, fix the leak. Don't keep charging it. That's not good. Because that's actually how you also introduce contaminants to the system. The high chance, the more you charge your system, the higher chances that is going to happen with a contaminated machine. That's the reality. Folks, I hope this video is helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some other videos. Until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.